Have you ever noticed how a woman can seem completely invested in you one moment, then suddenly become distant the next? Everything feels like it's moving forward. She's engaged in conversations, she's opening up, she's making time for you. You can feel the connection building, and then, without warning, something changes. Her messages become shorter, her energy feels different, she starts creating space where there wasn't any before. Naturally, your mind starts racing. Did I say something wrong? Did she lose interest? Is there someone else? But what if the answer is the exact opposite of what most men assume? What if her distance isn't always a sign that she's moving away from you? What if it's a sign that she's getting closer than she's comfortable with? That's the part most men never understand. A woman doesn't always withdraw because she feels nothing. Sometimes she withdraws because she's starting to feel too much. And when those emotions become real, they can trigger something powerful inside her. Not excitement, fear. Fear of becoming vulnerable. Fear of getting attached. Fear of investing emotionally and ending up hurt. The deeper the connection feels, the more exposed she becomes. And for many women, that exposure can feel overwhelming. So what does she do? She creates distance. Not necessarily because she wants less of you, but because she's trying to regain control of herself. Unfortunately, this is where most men sabotage the entire situation. The moment they sense her pulling back, they panic. They text more. They seek reassurance. They try to force clarity. They become hyper-focused on fixing something that may not even be broken. And without realizing it, they make her feel even more pressure, because now she's not only dealing with her emotions, she's dealing with yours too. The irony is that her pullback is often revealing something important. She's watching. Not consciously all the time, but instinctively. She's paying attention to how you respond when things become uncertain. Do you remain grounded, or do you lose your center the moment she creates space? That reaction tells her more than 100 good conversations ever could. In this video, we're going to explore what's actually happening beneath the surface when a woman pushes away the man she's beginning to want the most. Because once you understand the psychology behind it, everything starts to look different. The hot and cold behavior, the sudden silence, the confusing shifts in energy, they stop feeling like rejection and start revealing something much deeper. And the first thing you need to understand is this: her feelings often scare her far more than she'll ever admit. Most men see attraction as something positive and straightforward. If she likes you, she should move closer. Simple. But emotions rarely work that way, especially when they're genuine. When a woman begins developing real feelings, she starts losing the emotional distance that once protected her. Suddenly, your opinion matters more, your presence matters more, your absence matters more. And that's exactly what makes it uncomfortable. One day she's playful, expressive, completely engaged. The next day she's quieter, harder to read, less available. Not because her attraction disappeared, because it became significant. Deep feelings have a way of waking up old fears, past disappointments, old heartbreaks, memories she thought she had already moved beyond. When those feelings surface, her instinct may not be to move closer. It may be to slow everything down. Imagine you've been talking for weeks. The connection feels effortless. She starts sharing personal stories. She begins trusting you with parts of herself she doesn't normally reveal. Everything seems to be progressing naturally. Then suddenly, she needs space, or becomes less responsive, or appears emotionally distant. Most men interpret that as a loss of interest, but often she's trying to create enough room to process what she's feeling, because the moment she becomes emotionally invested, the stakes change. Now there's something to lose. Now there are risks. Questions begin appearing in her mind. Can I trust this? Am I getting attached too quickly? What happens if this doesn't work out? What happens if I care more than he does? And those questions create tension. The closer she feels to you emotionally, the more protective she becomes of her heart. That's why genuine attraction can sometimes produce behavior that seems completely contradictory from the outside. She's drawn toward you, yet part of her wants to retreat. She wants connection, yet she fears dependence. And that internal conflict becomes even stronger when another factor enters the picture. Because attraction isn't only about desire, it's also about control. And when a woman realizes she's losing some of that emotional control, an entirely different battle begins to unfold. One between what she's feeling and what she's trying desperately to manage. And that's where the next layer of this dynamic starts to reveal itself. And that's where the conflict becomes stronger than most men realize. Her emotions are pulling her toward the connection, while her mind is trying to protect her from it. One side is curious about where this could go. The other is scanning for every possible way it could end badly. That's why her behavior can seem so contradictory. One day she feels completely present. She's engaged, affectionate, and naturally drawn toward you. Then suddenly she creates distance, becomes harder to read, and leaves you wondering whether the connection was ever real to begin with. But often, that shift isn't a loss of attraction. It's self-protection. The stronger her feelings become, the louder her internal alarms get, because genuine attachment carries risk. The moment someone starts to matter, the possibility of disappointment becomes real. And that's a level of vulnerability many people struggle with, whether they admit it or not. So when she says she needs space, feels uncertain, or seems emotionally conflicted, she's frequently trying to create enough room to think clearly. Her emotions are accelerating faster than her comfort level allows, and she's attempting to slow everything down. This is where many men accidentally make things worse. They try to talk her out of her feelings. They look for perfect explanations. They believe one more conversation, one more message, or one more reassurance will solve the problem. But emotional fear rarely responds to logic. The harder you push for certainty, the more pressure she feels. And pressure tends to strengthen the very resistance you're trying to overcome. Which brings us to something even more important. 4. Sometimes distance reveals more than closeness. Most men view a pullback as a sign that something is broken. A woman often experiences it differently. When she creates distance, she's not only processing her emotions, she's also paying attention to yours. Not consciously, in a calculated way, instinctively. She's observing what happens when things become uncertain. Do you immediately panic? Do you abandon your own life and make her the center of your emotional world? Or do you remain steady? Because uncertainty has a way of exposing character. When everything feels easy, confidence is simple. But when communication slows down and clarity disappears, that's when emotional stability gets revealed. And women notice that. If her withdrawal instantly throws you into anxiety, she begins questioning whether your confidence depended on her attention all along. But if you remain grounded, continue living your life, and don't allow temporary uncertainty to consume you, something different happens. She starts seeing emotional strength. Not the loud kind, the quiet kind. The kind that doesn't need constant reassurance to stay centered. That's incredibly attractive because it communicates something deeper than words ever could. It tells her you're connected to her, but not dependent on her. And those are two very different things. 5. What looks like rejection is often fear of emotional surrender. Here's a truth that confuses many men. Physical attraction is relatively easy. Emotional attachment is where things become complicated. Because attraction can be exciting, attachment changes everything. The moment a woman realizes your absence would genuinely affect her, the connection becomes more real, and reality carries weight. Suddenly, she's no longer wondering whether she likes you. She's wondering what happens if she loses you. That's why some women become distant, precisely when things appear to be going well. The emotions stop feeling casual, the connection starts feeling significant, and significance creates vulnerability. You've probably seen this dynamic before. Everything flows naturally. Conversations feel effortless. She's investing, opening up, and showing consistent interest. Then, seemingly out of nowhere, she becomes harder to reach, less available, less expressive. It feels confusing because you're looking at the behavior while she's experiencing the emotion behind it. She's trying to regain her footing, trying to understand feelings that suddenly seem bigger than expected, and the men who navigate this best understand something crucial. Not every moment of distance requires a response. Sometimes it requires patience, sometimes it requires trust, sometimes it requires the discipline to stop interpreting every change in energy as a disaster. Because when you stay calm during those moments, you become associated with something rare: emotional safety. And eventually that creates a realization inside her that she can't force. She begins noticing that your presence doesn't create chaos, it creates peace. She begins recognizing that you didn't chase when she pulled away. You didn't demand certainty when she felt uncertain. You simply remained who you were. And that's often when her perspective starts to shift, which leads to something most men misunderstand completely. 6. Silence is not always the end of the story. When communication fades, the immediate assumption is usually that feelings disappeared too. But emotions don't work that neatly. People can be silent while still thinking, distant while still feeling, confused while still caring. In fact, some of the deepest emotional processing happens in complete silence. Because when there are no messages, no conversations, and no constant interaction, all that's left is reflection. And reflection has a way of bringing hidden emotions to the surface. The question is not always whether she's thinking about you. The more important question is what your response to that silence reveals about you. Because what happens next often determines whether the connection has room to breathe, or whether fear ends up destroying something that might have become much more. What many men never see is that her silence is often louder than her words. On the surface, it can look like indifference. It can feel like she's pulling away, shutting down, or losing interest. But beneath that distance, there's often a storm she's trying to understand herself. She's replaying conversations, questioning her emotions, and attempting to make sense of feelings that suddenly became heavier than she expected. Women rarely reveal the full depth of what they're processing. So when she creates space, it doesn't automatically mean she stopped caring. Sometimes it means the opposite. Sometimes the connection has become important enough that it scares her. And that's where most men lose their footing. Some immediately rush toward her, trying to close the gap. More texts, more questions, more attempts to pull her back. Others swing to the opposite extreme. They become cold, distant, and resentful, convincing themselves they're protecting their pride. But both reactions come from the same place: fear. One fears losing her, the other fears being hurt. Neither creates the safety she needs to sort through what she's feeling. What truly stands out is something much rarer. A man who remains steady, a man who doesn't demand answers before she's ready to give them, a man who doesn't disappear emotionally simply because she's confused. He understands that not every moment requires action. Some moments require patience. Because when emotions become overwhelming, many women retreat inward, not to punish you, not to manipulate you, but to regain clarity. She may want the connection and fear it at the same time. She may miss you while creating distance. She may care deeply while acting uncertain. Human emotions are rarely as straightforward as people pretend they are. That's why trying to force certainty almost never works. The more pressure she feels, the more she associates the connection with tension. But when your energy remains calm, something unexpected happens. You become associated with peace, and peace is memorable. It quietly communicates that she doesn't have to manage your emotions while she's struggling to understand her own. That's a level of emotional maturity that few people encounter. Which brings us to the moment that defines everything: the way you respond when she pushes you away. Because this is where attraction often grows or dies, not during the easy conversations, not during the exciting moments, but during uncertainty. When her behavior changes, your instinct may be to search for immediate answers, to figure out what happened, to fix something before it breaks. That's natural. But strength isn't the absence of emotion. It's the ability to remain composed despite it. The man who stands out isn't the one who chases reassurance. He's the one who trusts his value enough not to abandon himself when things become unclear. He gives space without creating distance. He remains open without becoming needy. He stays present without forcing outcomes. And women notice that, more than most men realize, because deep down, what she's looking for isn't perfection. It's emotional stability. Someone whose sense of self doesn't collapse the moment circumstances become uncertain. Someone who can remain grounded while she's finding her footing. The irony is that when a woman pulls away because her feelings have become intense, chasing usually pushes her further. But calm confidence often gives her the room she needs to recognize what she feels. Not because you manipulated the situation, because you respected it. And that's a very different thing. At the heart of all this is a simple truth. When a woman creates distance, it isn't always a sign that the connection is ending. Sometimes it's a sign that the connection has become real enough to challenge her emotional defenses. The question is never whether you can control her response. You can't. The real question is whether you can control yours. Can you remain centered when things become uncertain? Can you maintain your self-respect without becoming cold? Can you care without clinging? Because those qualities don't just make you attractive, they make you unforgettable. In the end, the men women remember most are rarely the ones who chase the hardest. They're the ones who remained grounded when everything felt unclear. The ones who didn't force closeness. The ones who didn't run from vulnerability. The ones who quietly showed that strength and peace can exist in the same man. And sometimes, long after the silence passes, that's the part she remembers most. Not the words you said, not the explanations you gave, but the calm presence that never demanded anything from her while she was trying to find her way back to herself. And there's something powerful about that, because the strongest connections are often built not in the moments when two people move closer together, but in the moments when one person steps back and the other has the wisdom to remain still.